Today's episode of Beyond the Mask is presented by the insurance specialists at Bright Think Wealth Strategies. Find the disability insurance coverage that fits you best right now. Email Robert Smith at rsmithjr@financialguide.com. The show is also made possible by the team at CRNA Financial Planning. Get a free consultation today to be guided through the complexities of investing and financial planning. Just visit crnafinancialplanning.com. We'd also like to thank Helping Hands and OSA EMR for their support of the show. And don't forget, listening to our podcast can earn you Class B credits. For more information on how you can submit them, check out the CE Credit tab on our website, beyondthemaskpodcast.com. Welcome to Beyond the Mask, Innovation and Opportunities for CRNAs, with Jeremy Stanley and Sharon Pierce. We know you spend your day caring for your patient's best interests. On our show, we want to care for you. Join us as we leave the operating room and learn the latest in the CRNA industry. Beyond the Mask starts in 10, 9, 8, 7.
Welcome to Beyond the Mask. I'm Jeremy Stanley, and I've been working with CRNAs for over 23 years, and I'm married to one. And my co-host is
Sharon Pierce.
Sharon's a practicing CRNA for over 20 years, a past president of the ANA, the NCANA, and she's held many other leadership roles. As usual, our goal with every episode is to educate and enlighten CRNAs, and I think our topic today is definitely going to do that. And Sharon, what time is it?
It's time to wake up, Jeremy.
I think it is. Well, hello, Miss Sharon Pierce. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. Glad to be back in the studio with you and looking forward to a great day.
Oh, absolutely. And it's great to be in the studio. How many times have I said that?
Tell you what, over the last year with COVID and, just having to be distanced, it's, it's tough. I think everybody's ready to get back together.
Oh, I am. I can't wait to hug everybody. I don't even care if I know them.
Well, we actually had, Mother's Day, and it was our first event in the past year, and it was actually pretty nice. Everybody had been, we've all had our shots and so forth. So, but it was so nice to be able to get together again. So
I'm just so happy you finally got your shot.
You shamed me. You shamed me.
I wanted to.
You did. And then I went and got the Johnson & Johnson. Like a week later, they announced about this blood clot stuff.
Oh, Jesus.
And then, these 6 people out of 8 million, I really got scared that I was one of them.
You should be scared.
So
you should be scared, but I'm glad you're vaccinated.
I am. I'm one shot and done. One and done. So.
Yeah, I'm glad.
Well, I'm looking forward to our topic today and our wonderful guest. Hi, Marjorie. How are you?
Just peachy. Glad to be here with y'all.
Yeah, Marjorie Everson out in the wonderful state of Montana.
Yes. Nice and quiet out here.
She's one of the best huggers I know, so I can't wait to see Marjorie. You've had your shots, right?
Yes.
Okay.
I have both.
The best huggers I know. That is a wonderful title.
She is. She's a great hugger.
I love hugging.
Does anybody else tell you that, Marjorie?
Yeah, I think several people do.
Okay. All right. So this title was well earned.
I'll give you a big hug.
And you can judge for yourself.
Okay. All right. And Sarah, I promise there's nothing. It's just a hug. Okay. Unless it's a really good hug, Marjorie. And then, maybe we'll talk later. Drinks, but,
It's all about the endorphins.
That's it.
Well, we're going to be talking today about closed claims involving CRNAs and SRNAs. And Marjorie, why don't you just give a little bit about your background to our listeners who might not know you, and then tell us why you think this topic is important.
Okay. Well, I have been a CRNA for like 27 years. I graduated from the Charity Hospital Xavier University School of Nurse Anesthesiology. So, I've got some great trauma training down in New Orleans, and been an educator for the past, about 19 years. So I'm currently semi-retired. I still do some OR things, and I do education and research. So closed claims are really important so that CRNAs and SRNAs can be aware of safety concerns that may impact the outcome of a malpractice claim. So if they hear about it and they see, well, what are people getting sued over or being brought into claims about, what can I do to avoid that? So that's why I think this area is really important.
Yeah, I just, as you were talking, John Fetcho just popped in my head. And I remember talking to John about a claim that had been filed. The CRNA was at the hospital. And I can't remember the type of policy, but whatever it was, they did not have to talk to the CRNA to settle the claim. Mm-hmm. And in fact, the CRNA did not even know that the claim had been settled until they were going to get credentialed somewhere else, and it popped up. And she said, "What the heck is this?" And said, "Oh, it was like $1 million claim or something. It was a big deal." And she went back, and sure enough, they had settled this claim, and she had no clue what was going on. I mean, that just amazed me.
It's staggering, isn't it?
So I think this, not that this is about that, but I mean, it just made me think about that after the fact. So again, why is this so important, Marjorie? What for our average listener out there who says, this doesn't apply to me? Why should they pay attention to this?
Well, as you'll hear, people get named in claims. And you just gave an example of a CRNA who had no clue, and he or she was named in a claim, and it was settled. But people were named in claims even if you do everything right and you follow standard of care. There are things that people are doing that are preventable. They're preventable. We're doing things in our practice that we shouldn't be. And so, doing closed claims and bringing this to the attention of us and our colleagues, that helps to, bring this to light and let people know, oh, well, yeah, people are getting named in claims for not paying attention. Or, an example is going into the operating room with malfunctioning equipment. I've seen several claims where people say, well, the SAT monitor doesn't always work, but I've never had a problem before, so we just went ahead with the case. And then they end up with a patient with an anoxic encephalopathy, and the patient either passes away or is stuck in a vegetative state for the rest of their lives. So it's really important to hear about things that you could be eventually named in a case about, and to be vigilant.
Marjorie, why don't you define exactly what closed claims are, how you've got access to them, and how you became involved in this whole process?
Sure. So several years ago, Dr. Lorraine Jordan and the AENA Foundation put out a call for researchers who are interested in closed claims research. So about a team of 15 of us signed up to do this. But, I wasn't really sure what a closed claim was. So it was explained to us that they're actually malpractice claims that have been processed and completed, including all the reviews and appeals. So these were all claims that were no longer in service. They weren't being adjudicated in the courts or anything. So the outcomes could have been settlements, or they could have been court cases with judgments or dismissal. So they were all finished. So, of course, that's sensitive information that we're privy to. So everybody had to sign a confidentiality agreement, and there was an initial descriptive analysis, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And once that was finished, teams formed, and kind of based on our areas of interest, we started looking at these claims to look at the qualitative information, like the depositions, and we looked at the anesthesia records and the surgical notes and any other information that was available. And so several teams went into cardiovascular complications, went into OB, cosmetic surgery, regional anesthesia, preventable claims, documentation. There was one on death and transfer of care and production pressure. So those were the areas that people went out in the qualitative area. But some of the key findings in the initial descriptive analysis were that over half the CRNAs in the claims were independent contractors, and they were male, and they've been practicing between 10 and 50 years. So it wasn't just, a lot of people assume that the younger and new anesthetists are the ones who are going to be named in these lawsuits or claims, but it's not. It's the ones who are kind of mid-career. Most of the patients were females, Caucasian, and they had a physical status of like 2 or 3. when the height and weight were known, the majority of them were obese. And so that's a problem right now. We know our society, and, Sharon, you're in the OR, I'm in the OR. And it's like, when I was in training, if I had a patient who was 200 pounds, I was scared. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm scared. Now, if I get a patient that's 200 pounds, I'm like, dang, it's my lucky day.
I know, right?
200 pounds. So we've really come a long way in, 20 something years, but the mean age of the patients were 50 years old. Most of the adverse events occurred in hospitals and followed by ambulatory centers. And again, most of these events were confirmed to have occurred while anesthesia was being given during the intra-anesthesia period. However, less than half of these adverse events were recognized by the anesthesia provider during this time. So this really emphasizes the importance of vigilance. Like, so, for example, a patient become an apneic, and a lot of CRNAs just weren't paying attention or didn't pick up that the patient was actually not breathing anymore. So the most frequent surgeries that were involved were orthopedic, general surgeries, cosmetic, OB, and neurological procedures. Most of the cases were involved with general anesthesia or a combination of general and regional techniques. And only about a third of the claims involved monitored anesthesia care or regional anesthesia by itself. The most common serious injury was death. And the most common negative outcome was due to a respiratory event, which I think, pretty much we've all learned in school, was respiratory events are one of the leading causes of malpractice claims. And then for when people filed a claim, and most of them involved a death or temporary or permanent major injury, which means like paraplegia, blindness, brain damage, loss of limbs, and the temporary major injury or like burns, surgical material left in the patient, and drug side effects.
So Marjorie, I was sitting here thinking as you were talking, you and Sharon are in the OR and you're seeing these obese people, and I'm in the Walmart seeing the obese people. So we're all seeing them, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But you don't have to put them to sleep.
No, but sometimes I wish I knew how I could do that. But
I feel the same way about you sometimes, Jeremy.
I'm sure you do. As might a lot of people, but that's okay. Another topic for another time, right?
That's it.
But I just kind of drilled down on a point that you made, Marjorie, is you said it wasn't the newer CRNAs that were involved in this. It was 10 years, I think you said to 50 years. And my mind directly went to, if after you've been doing it for 10 years, was it that there were things that maybe were on autopilot that could have caused this? And, I don't want to say not paying attention enough, but, we all, as we, get better at what we do, you just do it and don't even think about it. And you think, I'm good at this. Was there any findings such as that in the studies, Marjorie?
Well, so some of the things that when we started doing our qualitative analysis, out of all the different studies that we found, there were several common themes that were found throughout, whether it was the cosmetic, the death, the cardiovascular, cosmetic. But one of the biggest things was, we can have the lack of vigilance and knowledge deficit, and the errors in judgment. So this, again, was an example for knowledge deficit, was tied to a patient with electrocautery burn. And in the deposition, the CRNA stated that they were unaware that the oxygen should be decreased when using electrocautery around the head or face region.
Oh, my.
And the patient is not intubated. So, that's something we're all taught. But I mean, and Sharon, when I was in school, it was just kind of like, they didn't really emphasize an FiO2 of less than 30% if you're doing something around the face and you're not intubated. So, so it could be that. But some of the other things that we found were ineffective communication patterns. That was a big one. And it could have been between the CRNA and the patient, between the CRNA and other anesthesia providers, and between the CRNAs and other types of providers. So an example for a patient was there was a patient who was having cosmetic surgery. And we know we love to be beautiful. We want to have our cosmetic surgery. However, there was a patient who failed to tell the anesthetist that she had some recent chest pains. She wanted her surgery so bad, and she just didn't tell anybody. There was nothing in the pre-op about that. She didn't mention it. There was no previous record saying that she had heart disease or anything. So unfortunately, this patient died, after she went home, had a massive MI, and the family said, oh yeah, she's been having chest pains and she was supposed to be worked up. But the patient didn't tell the anesthesia provider. So the anesthesia provider was named in that suit, but there was just no way the anesthesia provider could have known because it wasn't disclosed. Another case of between a nurse anesthetist and a surgeon, there was a case that involved, a facial fire, and the surgeon didn't tell the CRNA that he was going to be using electrocautery, and the CRNA had just a little bit of 2 to 3 liter nasal cannula oxygen on, and then caused a fire. And if the CRNA had known that the surgeon was going to whip out the electrocautery, could have said, hey, stop for a minute and let's get this oxygen off and out. So that's a problem. Others were, there were a lot of violations of AANA standards. And another thing that was really interesting, we saw a lot of production pressure and normalization of deviance. Yeah. So, recently on AANA Connect, I saw somebody made a comment about normalization of deviance. And so we're like, well, what is that? Well, it was a term that was coined by Diane Vaughan during the Space Shuttle Challenger incident. And so it's defined as the gradual process through which unacceptable practice or standards become acceptable. And as the deviant behavior is repeated without catastrophic results, it becomes a social norm for the organization. So, during the space shuttle, they knew theoretically that O-ring could cause a problem and cause an explosion. But because it had been cold before, and they've never had a catastrophic incident, they went ahead. It was a go launch, but they were still battling it back and forth up until the launch. And we know what happens. But an example that we found, there were several in the claims, but one example that comes to mind is a CRNA was providing non-operating room anesthesia in an area that had monitors that weren't always working. They were kind of intermittently working. And it was just a MAC case. The patient was prone, and the SAT monitor was not working appropriately. And there was no Untitled CO2 monitor available. So the patient had an anoxic event and expired a few days after the procedure. And prior to the case, and reading the the interviews, the CRNA had noted, had some concern about the equipment wasn't always working, but nobody had ever previously had an adverse event. So they just went ahead and did the case, and unfortunately had the catastrophic event.
Wow.
I know. What do you say to that? The production pressure piece, I think, is becoming a bigger piece as we go along.
As a CRNA, you spend years preparing yourself for this career, so we don't want to see you lose out on any of the income you've worked so hard to earn. The best way to protect yourself and give you the confidence that a major life event won't disrupt your financial future is through disability insurance. We've known disability income specialist Robert Smith for many years and have seen the work he's done with nearly 2,000 CRNAs over multiple decades. He can help identify any gaps in your existing coverage and fill those gaps by finding the best value on a policy. Contact Robert and let him know you heard about him on our podcast. Send him an email at rsmithjr@financialguide.com. That's rsmithjr@financialguide.com. Or call him at 504-394-6557. Protect your greatest asset as a CRNA, yourself and your ability to earn a living by adding disability insurance to your financial plan.
Now, let's go back. So you did these closed claims, and when closed claims spanning, 2003 to 2012, has there been a follow-up since then? Has another one of these been done looking at closed claims and identifying problems?
Not yet. We're in the, Dr. Jordan is in the process of trying to find someone to work with at a different company, because the company we work with, I think they're no longer in business. Mm-hmm. And it is kind of a touchy situation going to an insurance company and saying, hey, why don't you let my group of people look at your claims? And, there's a lot of legal implications there. And how do we get the information to you in a secure manner? So that is on the list, and I'm hoping that we can look at it and hopefully things have gotten better, but I don't know.
Well, the reason why I asked that is because from 2012 to 2021, the one factor that you stated seemed to pop up in a lot of the closed claims was obesity, and it has just gotten worse. And I say that because I remember back when I first got out of school, if you did somebody in the office, we didn't allow anybody with a BMI over 40.
Mm-hmm.
Now we do them up to a BMI of 55.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
In the office. Now, I have done a couple that were right on the edge and sometimes a little higher, but we always tell them we've got to evaluate their airway. And you know as well as I do that some people, you look at them and they look like me when they're laying there in the bed, long neck, big mouth, and, Malampati 1. And then you pull back the covers and it's like, oh my Lord, look what they were hiding. And so, I can handle an airway. So we have done some that are a little bit on the edge there. And of course they do fine. But in the last 9 years, this problem has soared.
Oh, yeah. I can imagine. I was also thinking, with COVID that... for a while, obviously surgeons weren't doing surgery. And then when you bring surgery back online, they're trying to turn those rooms over as fast as they possibly can. Obviously, those surgeons want to do those cases because it's more money for them, and there's going to be pressure on them to turn over, and the hospital is going to put pressure to turn over quicker.
And to do more cases.
And to do more cases, and it just leads itself to probably more errors on the anesthetist part because there's a lot of pressure there.
Well, you bring up another good point, though, Jeremy, and we know that people did not get care during COVID, so they're sicker, I think, and we don't know what COVID is going to mean long term. So it's going to be interesting looking at some of these closed claims a little bit further down the road after COVID.
Yeah.
Right. And one of our teams is really interested in production pressure. So we did like a whole meta synthesis about the production pressure and showed that, there's a culture. The hospital culture doesn't embrace. They say they embrace safety, but the whole production pressure seems to take precedence over safety. So, and it's gone on to there are a few studies that are getting ready to take place about production pressure in CRNA. So hopefully we'll be able to bring to light to our institution saying, stop it. Just because, we're in normalization deviance, we haven't had a problem yet, doesn't mean that you aren't going to have a problem. And it's, it's more than just harm to the patients, harm to the CRNAs.
Yeah.
We're the second victim. People don't think about, when you have something terrible happen, you just feel awful.
Right.
You feel isolated, and it's just like, and nobody thinks about you, like, how can I take, you're worried about being shamed by your colleagues. Like, ooh, did you see what so-and-so did? Instead of, oh my gosh, that could have been me. That could have happened to me. And so that's huge. And Sharon, I came out here, I was in a care team in New Orleans for 20 something years. And I come out here, I'm in independent practice and, no anesthesiologist or anything. I'm like,
or even a
you
second
can do
set of
cases
hands.
up to 50 BMI. I'm like, what? 50? Are you kidding me? And you're saying 55. And even though it's MAC cases or sedation, as well as I know, those things can go south in a hot minute. So,
well, and they're
really
unsecured airways. That's the other thing. They are unsecured airways. And, just like you alluded to before, I'll come in and I'll be looking at my caseload and, I might be doing 22 cases today. And I don't have a single person with a BMI under 30.
Gosh. Sharon, because I know the situations you work in, and are there situations where you walk in and go, I'm not going to do this? And then I'll follow that up. What is the reaction of the physician at that point to you and maybe whomever you're working for at the time?
I have had some incidences with physicians. I'll give you one example. I had a young girl come in for EGD upper. Bad asthma. She smokes. She sounds like crap. And when I go up to pre-opper, that you have 2 minutes to do, she's got a healing trach scar.
Oh, jeez.
And I just said, so what happened here? And she was 2 weeks postpartum.
Oh,
and she said, I had to have a C-section and I come out with a trach. Well, I have who in
Now,
this day and
Sharon,
age...
I've heard of making mistakes, but if they're cutting up here for the C-section, something's wrong.
Right.
Even I know that, okay?
But, nowadays people don't come out with trachs. 30 years ago, you didn't have LMAs. You
Right.
went to a trach, but not now. So I had no idea what had occurred. And so I talked to the surgeon or proceduralist. And you always try and be nice, and you just say, I really don't think this is an office case. I think she needs to go to the hospital to be done. And he starts screaming at me. You can see his jugular veins standing out in his neck. He is just screaming, "You canceling my case? Are you canceling my case?" And I just let him go, and I look at him, and I smile, and I say, "No, sir. I'm canceling the anesthesia. You're welcome to do it if you would like."
Go girl.
I'm going to go sit down in the lounge and get me a cup of coffee, and I'll be ready for the case after this one. The nurses are crying. They're like, if you don't want to do it, and I will tell proceduralists sometimes, if I'm nervous, you should be terrified.
Yeah.
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 And so I just went and sat down and waited. And sure enough, the nurses come and got me, and they said, he's going to send her to the hospital and he's ready for you. So I went back in there, and you could have cut the tension with a knife. Exactly. And finally, when he calmed down, he said, "So what will they do for this patient at the hospital that you can't do for her here?" And I said, "Well, in reality, probably nothing." I said, "And 99% chance she would have been fine." I
Right.
said, "I am here to keep the 1% from happening."
Yep.
And I've worked too hard for my license, and I know you have worked too hard for your license, and we are on the same page, and patient safety is your goal and my goal. And what's he going to say?
Yeah.
Oh no, I don't give a flip about that. But I said, at the hospital, the difference is there's somebody standing around picking their nose.
Right. You got hands, you've got equipment, you've got...
There is nobody here but me and you don't know how to help me on a bad airway.
Yep.
So I've had, that's
Oh,
just
sure.
one of them.
Yeah. But all CRNAs are type A, pretty strong personalities, educated well. But I have a feeling that there might have been some CRNAs that wouldn't have done what you did, Sharon. And that kind of leads me in, Marjorie, to some of these studies. Were there unexpected findings that you found as well there? And were there some positive things that, you also found out of this?
Right. And I was actually, as Sharon was saying that, one of the unexpected findings we had was a lot of CRNAs, they had exactly what Sharon was saying. I don't think this is a case we should be doing here. Yeah. But they allowed the surgeon to kind of bully them or wherever they were, and they went ahead and did the case anyway, and then they ended up having a poor outcome. I'd say in several of them that we read, I knew I shouldn't have done this. Another one is like, they, a surgeon said they wanted a block on the patient, and they didn't sit still, and the CRNA is like, I'm not really comfortable doing this, and didn't had a high spinal, and so it's just like, So, other unexpected findings were CRNAs can follow the standard of care and do nothing wrong, but still poor outcomes happen, and you get named.
Yep.
And another thing that really bummed me out was almost half of the anesthesia claims were preventable by us and our colleagues.
Wow.
And over half of them involved inappropriate anesthesia management. So, the preventable thing is an unexpected and sad finding, but also it's a positive finding, because guess what? they're preventable.
We can teach.
We can learn from these. So, the positive findings were CRNAs who had excellent documentation followed standard care, even though they were named, they were dismissed. So we saw several of those that just popped out. So, while, we need to really be vigilant, follow standard of care. Sharon, in school, when you hear standard of care, I teach professional aspects. So I go over standard of care and people are just like, their eyes are glazing over. But, since I started doing closed claims research, I get to bring these cases in and all of a sudden they're like, oh my gosh, wow, I guess I better. Yeah. If my stat isn't working, maybe I shouldn't start that case until I have equipment that's working. But then you're going to have people tapping their feet saying, let's get this ball rolling. And, it's a standard of care. Having functioning monitors and having the alarms on is a standard of care. So, you have that. I teach students, I'm in the OR. You got that going for you. It's a standard of care. I'm not going to violate the standard of care.
Well, I've found that if you say, we both have the same goal, doctor, and that's patient safety, what are they going to say? No, I'm not concerned about that.
Right.
And so if you just give them an out, back to the production pressure thing, and I may have heard this at one of the lectures because I know that Lorraine does one on the cases, the different cases in the closed claims. You do too, and highlight them. But the GI model, where the CRNAs work for the GI doc.
Right.
And I think that has huge potential for problems because
conflict of interest.
Yeah. Well, they'll say to you, hey, I sign your paycheck. You put this patient to sleep.
Yep.
So I have constantly been amazed that this has not been addressed in more detail. And I think that it is a huge place.
Interesting.
That could be problematic.
Well, and I don't know the answer to this. And Marjorie, you're an educator, and Sharon, you probably know everything. But
at least I tell him I do.
But yeah, exactly. You got me believing it anyway. But our students and even anesthetists, and I guess it's kind of a two-pronged approach here. But are they taught how to say no in the proper way? And
that's a good question.
I mean, and you guys know it. I mean, some CRNAs can come across as though, let me put this politely, it's my way or the highway. And I'm just wondering, are students being taught? And then the second part to my question, Marjorie, was, some of the things you said they were preventable and they can be educated. And it sounds to me like this mean old test that everybody's going to have to take maybe could be tailored to some of these situations that maybe weren't handled properly to educate our CRNA community on ways to prevent some of these episodes.
So I think now we're talking more about communication. And I know in the last two programs I've worked with, we're dealing with educating students about communication, about speaking up. And even when I was in school, some of the CRNAs were like, we don't really rock the boat. And when I first graduated, there was something I was like, one of these docs told me, turn off your alarms. I'm like, no, I'm not turning off my alarms. That's standard of care. And the CRNA I was getting report from, she was an old timer. And she's like, oh no, we just go ahead and do what they say. I'm like, no, this is not, the 1930s. We're not the handmaidens. It's about patient safety. So that's what I try to teach the students, to be, kind of like passive aggressive, but be nice about it. Like, this is a patient safety issue. I'm concerned about this. And, right now with the team steps, everybody's supposed to be able to say what they want to say. And if you have a concern, but we know that it really irritates the surgeons if you say, we're not going to do this case. And even if you have a good, valid reason, when you put the patient safety, like Sharon said, they can't deny it. They may be angry, but once you say, we're on the same page, it's all about patient safety, then, they can't get mad.
Today's show is brought to you by the folks at CRNA Financial Planning, an independent consulting firm that offers financial planning services exclusively to CRNAs and their families. From planning for a child's future college expenses to building a predictable income stream in retirement, the firm is committed to offering you comprehensive financial services, customized to fit your unique needs and objectives. If you have questions about your financial future, get them answered. Call the team at 855-304-3748. That's 855-304-3748. Or go online to crnafinancialplanning.com.
Here are some of the things that, that we found were violations of standards, and this is how maybe you can approach it a little bit differently. Like, one of the things we found were the pre-op, doing a pre-op assessment. A lot of us, Sharon, you said you got 2 minutes. I have the same thing, 2 or 3 minutes before you get to see the patient. And sometimes that's not enough. And and sometimes that'll bite you in the rear end. For example, we had a case where a morbidly obese patient was supposed to come in for a procedure under regional. So the CRNA didn't really conduct a thorough pre-anesthesia evaluation, didn't really assess the airway. And they had to convert to a general anesthetic, and the CRNA couldn't ventilate or intubate and didn't have a difficult airway cart immediately available. So when the CRNA could finally intubate, the patient already suffered an anoxic encephalopathy and, eventually expired. And the patient apparently had previous anesthesia complications, but the CRNA didn't know that because they didn't look at the chart. So always, if you can, conduct as thorough of a pre-anesthesia assessment as you can. But even, I do a lot of GI work. I'm looking at those people's airways. I'm like, this could go bad. I need to know if I'm going to be able to intubate this patient. And where I work, thankfully, we have a McGrath in every room. So those are some, that's one thing. The other thing is about, when you have a standard 7, implement and adjust your care plan based on the patient's physiologic status. So we had people that weren't really adjusting, paying attention. So, we had one where an elderly patient was with multiple comorbidities, was scheduled for a procedure in a cardiac cath lab. They didn't put any oxygen on the patient. Now, you and I are probably thinking, oh my gosh, are you serious? But, people don't, because production pressure or normalization of deviance. But this patient had a SAT in the low 80s and was hypotensive and bradycardic. And the CRNA thought the monitors were malfunctioning again and began to just pay attention to the equipment and not to the patient. And then the cardiologist said something about, hey, there's some dark blood and the heart's kind of motionless on the fluoroscopy. And the CRNA was still troubleshooting. I'm like, no, it's the monitors. Okay, so, this is basic nursing. Put the whole picture together. And one of the things I find with new students, when they first get in the OR, their comfort zone is the clipboard charting and looking at the monitor, and I forget to look at the patient to see, is this all put together, and does this make sense to me? So you really have to be vigilant and continuously monitor your patient. Utilize the patient assessment with your monitors. If your monitors aren't working, just reach down and check a carotid pulse. Look at their lips and see if they're blue. And one of the things I say, I give oxygen to everybody unless it's contraindicated when I'm doing sedation.
Absolutely. I tell all the nurses, I go oxygen on first, oxygen off last.
Yeah. And so then, again, here's another area where we found a lot of violations. And even now, I still hear it from students going into clinical, not monitoring your twitches with the twitch monitor when you give a muscle relaxant. Now, it's not as bad now with Sigamadex. But we saw a case where a patient was having an eye procedure. They had some rocuronium. They had to decrease the gas because of the hypotension. And the patient bucked and was blinded. But the CRNA never did check twitches to see if, maybe they need a little more muscle relaxing. I'm turning down the gas, but maybe I should increase my muscle relaxant. So, that's another thing is when you're using, even with Sigamadex, still monitor your muscle relaxant. That's a standard of care. And then,
wait, there were two that I specifically remember, and I'm not sure if I was listening to you or Lorraine, and one of them was a case where they had to get the patient out, and it was on the second floor of the facility, and the gurney wouldn't fit when they called the EMS to get the patient out.
Wow.
So I just went and oriented at a new place a couple of weeks ago, and it's on the second floor. First thing I said is, has anybody checked to make sure the gurney will go on to the elevator if we've got to get a patient out of here? And they said, yes, we've checked that. And I could tell.
That's good.
But I mean, that's one thing that I would have never thought about. Another one was, and if you do endoscopy, you know, sometimes they'll have some passive regurg, and, you know, you'll have some green bile on the pillow. And a patient had gotten a corneal burn because the bile was on the pillow, and, you know, they can't blink because they're so deep, and the bile had gotten in their eye. So every time a patient does that, I'll hold the head up and I'll have the nurse flip the pillow over, and they're always giving me crap, and I'm like, listen, there's something behind this. So I'm holding the head up. You flip the pillow over. Plus, it looks nasty on the pillow when you take the patient out.
Right.
But little things like that I think that these closed claims just bring it up that you wouldn't necessarily have thought about it.
Yeah. Yeah. This is, I mean, all great stuff, and it's obviously stuff that our CRNAs that are listening should hear and know about. Marjorie, we want to thank you for being with us today and all the great work that you do. And you're also on the foundation board with me, and
Nice.
you know, you do a great job there. And so as we kind of wrap up, anything you want to close on?
Well, I just want to remind our colleagues, you know, just follow your standard of care, document well. I know we're taught that, but please document well, and don't succumb to production pressure. I mean, that's a real problem. And, you know, just be very nice about it, and just bring up patient safety. You know, just be safe. And, you know, you work too hard for your, like Sharon said, you work too hard for your, you know, for your license to have it be thrown away.
Yeah. And not to mention the financial side of things, which, you know, I'm always going to bring up.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, it costs a lot of money.
Yes.
And it could cost you a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
And in the long run, paying attention and doing the things you should be doing are a whole lot cheaper and better for your pocketbook as well. So
true that.
all right, lightning round. Your favorite time, Sharon?
No, I love it.
We need like you know, some great music right here, Walter. You know, lightning round.
I know. We need something good. Walter will come up with it, our editor. So, Marjorie, if you could have dinner with someone alive or dead, who would it be?
I would say Jesus.
Oh,
I
love
think of
Jesus. I think it'd be so
anybody
cool
better.
to meet him, and yeah.
I don't think you'd eat much though.
No, maybe not.
well, you know, I always use that whenever I'm teaching about politics and advocacy, because I say, you know, go out to dinner with somebody and sit down and talk to them. It worked for Jesus breaking bread. So,
Yeah,
you know,
that's
it'll
right.
work with a politician too. If
Absolutely.
you get that opportunity.
Yeah. Marjorie, what are you grateful for right now?
I am grateful for my husband. I love my husband. He's such an awesome guy. He's so supportive. I can come up with some crazy and get involved in some crazy stuff.
That's true.
You know, and Sharon knows Pierce has a great husband
Yeah.
too. But they just go along with our craziness and support us. And I couldn't pick a better husband. So that's what I'm grateful for.
That's great. That's awesome.
That is good. So, what's your favorite movie?
One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I didn't see that until I was in college, but I don't know. I just love that. I don't know. There's something about that movie that just.
I think one of our old lobbyists, Dave Hebert, was in that movie.
Oh, really?
Was he really?
Yeah, I think it was One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I'm pretty sure that's
Remember
it.
Dave. Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Sure enough.
Huh. All right, Marjorie, what's your superpower?
Hugs. I love
Hugs.
giving hugs. That's my superpower.
See, I told you she was good
I know.
at
I'm
it.
going to have to try these hugs out, you know?
Well, Austin, here we come.
That's right.
Yes.
Yep. Hopefully we'll all be together in Austin.
And they're non-romantic.
Yeah.
They're
Oh,
not
they're
romantic.
super platonic.
Yes. They're full of endorphins.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, the world needs more hugs, Marjorie.
You're not kidding.
I agree.
Right? So,
You are not kidding.
well, Marjorie, we want to thank you for being on with us today and sharing this great information and for all the wonderful work that you do to support the CRNA community and the knowledge that you expound. We just really appreciate you being here.
Yes.
And thank you for all the work y'all are doing. Y'all are awesome.
Thank you, Marjorie.
Thank
Well,
you for having
Sharon,
me.
I think it's a wrap.
I think so.
Well, we want to thank our listeners for listening to Beyond the Mask with Jeremy Stanley. And
Sharon Pierce.
if you like our show, you know the single best way to help our show grow is, Sharon?
Like us, share us on social media. Tell your friends and tell your people that you're not friends with.
I'll have to change that. I say single best way, you rattle off like 5 things.
I
But that's good.
Well,
We're in the top 50 medical podcasts.
in the country.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, and we're going,
To number 1.
but we got to be in the top 10 first.
That's it.
So tell your friends, like us, listen to us wherever you get your podcasts. Marjorie.
Yeah.
Until next time.
It's a wrap.
Have you thought about what would happen if you weren't able to work for 2 or 3 years? On average, 25% of people will file a disability claim, and most of us aren't prepared for that loss of income. Every CRNA needs to protect their biggest asset, yourself, and your ability to earn with a disability insurance policy. We recommend contacting Robert Smith, a master disability insurance specialist with more than 30 years of experience and 1,800 CRNA clients, to find the coverage that fits you best. The best way to do that is to send him an email at rsmithjr@financialguide.com. That's rsmithjr@financialguide.com. Or call him at 504-394-6557. Beyond the Mask is made possible by the team at CRNA Financial Planning. With almost 2 decades of experience, the firm guides CRNAs through the complexities of investing and financial planning. Schedule a free consultation today by calling 855-304-3748 or go online to crnafinancialplanning.com.
Hi, this is Jackie Rolls, President of the International Federation of Nurse Anesthetists and President and founder of Our Hearts, Your Hands, a global anesthesia support community that takes donations to allow nurse anesthetists in low and middle income countries to go to educational programs, buy equipment, or textbooks. Your donations are tax deductible, and we would appreciate your support.
OSA EMR is a free anesthesia EMR developed by CRNAs that you can download and use on an iPad. Our nonprofit mission is to make sure that solo and small practice CRNAs can digitally record their anesthetics. To learn more, visit osaemr.com to download and consider donating to our cause. Remember, for CRNAs, data is destiny.
Be sure to subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and anywhere you like to listen to shows. Also be sure to check out BeyondTheMaskPodcast.com. Each episode is posted there with a corresponding blog post, and we timestamp important parts of the episode to help you quickly get to the content you're looking for. Also check out the special series section on the site. You can follow along and catch up on the CRNA History Series, episodes specifically about political conversations in the industry. Or try the CRNA Personal Finance Series. It's all on BeyondTheMaskPodcast.com. And if you have a question for the show or want to be a guest, or even suggest a particular topic, fill out the contact form on the site or send an email directly to us at info@BeyondTheMaskPodcast.com. And lastly, let's take the conversation social. Check out our Beyond the Mask podcast Facebook page and Facebook group.